Wonderful. So welcome all to this webinar on gender identity at work. We're super excited to have you here today, whether you're joining us because you're taking a small break, getting away from the half-term madness, multitasking. Hopefully you'll find the next 45 minutes informative. Before we begin and before I introduce our amazing guest, a few housekeeping points. So this webinar is recorded, meaning you will get a recording after the event, or if you would like to share it as well. I do want to highlight that you can use the chat section to write any comments. You can also use the Q&A function. However, if you wish to remain anonymous during the Q&A, do tick the anonymous box to ensure that you're not revealing any identifiable information. We will have plenty of time for the Q&A at the end. Do pop them in as and when you're having questions. We want this to be as interactive as possible and everyone to enjoy and get the most out of it. So I'm Céline Crawford. I'm your host for today. For those who don't know me, I run people and operations here at Fertifa. And like many of us at Fertifa, I have a personal story with reproductive health, which is very close to my heart. Having also been a chief people officer, on the other hand, you can say I've experienced both sides of the reproductive health coin and hopefully can give you a unique perspective. If you're new to Fertifa and it's the first time that you meet us, welcome. We're Europe's largest reproductive health benefits provider. So we help employers like Meta and Lululemon support their employees throughout their entire reproductive health journey and really help making workplaces more inclusive, which is really what this webinar is about, how to ensure your workplace is inclusive when it comes to gender identity. So to help educate us on this topic, I'm super excited to have Joseph Harwood with us. Hello, Joseph.
Hello. Thank you for having me again.
Wonderful to have you. I know this is the second webinar that you've done with us, so we're very, very lucky to have you here for a second time. We're on to, LGBTQ History Month in February, so we want to shed some light on gender identity at work. I know you're a diversity and inclusivity consultant. You're also a digital media pioneer. You've won awards on beauty, but why don't you tell us a bit more about yourself so we can get
Of
to know you?
course. Of course. So I am Joseph Harwood. People call me Joe or Jojo, depending on all kinds of things. But I was one of the first trans creators to actually work on social media when it really, really began. So now we're going back almost 2 decades. And I found social media to be a way of networking and creating a bit of a sort of like connection with other people like myself. Where I grew up was a little village. There wasn't anyone that was similar or going through the same gender dysphoria as me. And I wanted to build something for myself. So I started to use social media not just to bridge connections, but also to brand myself. And that led me onto YouTube, where I became very well known as a makeup artist. And I won a huge competition that Simon Cowell created called the U Generation competition. And I became one of the first trans people to ever win a reality talent show. So that happened now literally 10 years ago. So it's been like ever since then, I kind of saw in different variations of my industry blocks that kind of fell into my place, into my path. I saw no representation, no leadership roles. I saw very limited support behind the scenes. And I started to really work behind the scenes in the beauty industry in 2017-18, where I worked with a L'Oreal innovations brand called Jack of Black. And I designed some products that were for trans people to find comfort in their own skin by using makeup. And because I did such a great job with that, L'Oreal invited me inside to talk about inclusion and diversity with their Out Up movement, which led to more and more and more on that scheme. So I worked with Puig, Estee Lauder. Then I moved into other companies from Dell to I actually worked with Meta as well and things like this. So it's been extraordinary, really, to have my voice be seen as important because I try and keep things very from my own experience and from my own point of view. So that's me.
I love that. That's so amazing. And I think that's so important because, as people say, you can't be what you can't see. So it's super important to, help with that. Before we actually go into our webinar, I do want to share a poll because we love data at Fertifa. So I'm going to ask everyone to participate if that's okay. I'm going to launch it right now. The question: does your organization have inclusive fertility policies in place? It should read inclusive policies, I think, but let's see what people answer. I don't know if you can see this, Joseph. Can you see?
I can. It
You
popped up
can.
for me.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful. So far, we have 50% that have a policy in place that's inclusive, 35% don't, and 15% not sure. 63 people have voted. I'm just going to give it another second. Okay, that's interesting. Oh, okay. So 45% yes, 41%, so almost half and half, and 14% not sure. Very interesting. Thank you so much for voting. Hopefully this discussion will help shed some light as to the inclusivity part, if you do have a policy, to make sure that it is. So we're going to start with a very, very basic question. What are gender inclusive policies? Obviously, for us at Fertifa, when we say gender inclusive, it means inclusive of fertility, family forming, parental policies, but it should account for all paths to parenthood, right? And that also means surrogacy, adoption, egg donation, fertility preservation, etc. Why is it important, Joseph, for companies to account for all these paths, as I just outlined here?
Well, I think talking from my own experience and looking into surrogacy, trans experiences are so different. And I think there's always been this sort of like advertisement that's gone on for the last 6 or 7 years of what a trans person is. And to give a little bit of background about me, so when I went to school, I naturally looked like a girl. My puberty was not like anyone else's. I grew breasts without going to start on hormone replacement. So I literally didn't know what was going on in my body. I suffered from extreme gender dysphoria because of that. And I didn't get much support from a doctor. I didn't actually get much insight. It was only through talking to other trans people. And that was kind of my motivation when I joined on social media to begin with, was to find out information because there wasn't much there. And when you go through a journey where you have different chemistry or you suffer from something called gender dysphoria, which is where you feel a displacement within your own body, you have to really think about what you need to do to fit into the world, because it's not just an experience of going through a physiological change, whether you go on hormones through a doctor or whatever your experience is. It's almost like a second puberty. And within that, there are issues when it comes to actually the adoption process, fostering process. And if you do go on a chemical transition or you're going through a surgical transition, you do need to think about things like preservation of your fertility, because going on hormones reduces your ability to have a kid. So when I was in my last long-term relationship, we were looking at this for nearly 4.5 years, trying to figure out all the various things we could do, whether it be fostering, and it to me, it was like, this is just opening Pandora's box, because there isn't any resources out there to find out why there are, because it depends on what you are on your birth certificate. It depends on how you are living, like if you're in the same country, which I was living between two countries. There was all these different things when it came to surrogacy. Is the sperm count high enough? All these different things that can affect your ability to have a family. And I think it's so unique to individuals, but at the general kind of level, everyone goes through the same confusion, whether you want to go through IVF in a cisgender couple or a straight couple. That's absolutely similar in so many ways. So I think for me, I had a personal reason to look into this, and I was so privileged to be speaking about this. But I think just given my experience, maybe can give some insight into where things are difficult and can be improved. But I guess as we continue, we can talk more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Because just to talk about surrogacy, that has actually quadrupled in the last 10 years. So it is something that's becoming more and more common. And I think a third of parents trying to use the surrogacy route are, same-sex couples. And it's very interesting that there is still not enough information or guidance necessarily to help people navigate that. And as you say, family forming is very confusing to begin with if things are not, cookie cutter or going exactly as expected. So I think it's so important what you say about helping people understand what the process might be for a specific couple, because their needs are going to be completely different to another couple.
Mhm.
And we always say at Fertifa, everyone's journey is different, everyone's path is different. So absolutely. And to add to that, we also know that only 3% of people who identify as trans have preserved their fertility, which is actually a very, very low number. What do you think about that?
Well, it's an economic reason behind that because most trans people feel and experience discrimination in the workplace in a number of different ways. I mean, the amount of times that people don't take me as a scientist, my background is actually in biochemistry, which I studied at an MSc level. Like they just think that because I'm androgynous and I used to look like feminine presenting every day, that I'm just this fame, ambition, influencer and not an expert in my field with a set of experiences that could perhaps help. And it's like having to overcome that and trying to be valued at your worth as a trans person is always quite an obstacle because there aren't enough examples of people like myself that go into companies like this. There are now, thank God I'm here. But we don't see that. And there are different things when people transition and they're kicked out of their home because their parents don't support what their journey is going to be. They might have to put all of their money into their rehoming, or if they want to go through a process of surgery to combat gender dysphoria, it's not offered on the NHS, or the secondary sexual characteristics that people want to remove or alter. None of that's covered. It's only the basis. Things like as laser hair removal is not covered in an extensive way. So it's like there is economic reasons why people can't afford to preserve their fertility, and I think that's something that a lot of people don't even think about. And also, when you're going on a chemical transition, you don't know what your actual ability to remain fertile is going to be unless you rigorously test it. It's like such an analytical process because you don't know if you're going to be able to have a baby if you continue to stay on hormones. A lot of trans women that have not had down below surgery but want to have a baby, they have to go off hormones, which means the secondary characteristics of their birth sex are going to come back, which means they might have to go through additional counselling to support that. But it's such that it's like a minefield because there's so many different things that pop up that people just forget to think about. And I think all of those can be considered. I mean, everyone's issues, whether you're cisgendered or trans, are equally as important. It just, I think there isn't enough examples of trans people talking about it.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you bring up such an important point going back to inclusive policies is that if you have a policy, it has to be supported by an anti-discrimination policy. And I think that's something that you and I had discussed. Why is that so important in your mind?
Well, it's difficult because I think like when we were discussing this, it's like what are the sort of perimeters of what is allowed and what is kind of supported within the workplace? Like, do we have those? Like, I know when I started to work in the beauty industry, there wasn't actually the mental health support that takes place for someone that's going through transition. If someone's come out as trans and they're working in a corporate environment, for example, are they going to be understood as needing that additional support? Because again, it's like a social puberty that they're going through, which is it's not dissimilar to going through menopause when you're on hormonal replacement therapy. It's very, very individual. It can affect your behavioral stuff. So to acknowledge that that is what's going to happen and have a support system in place for that is so important. And I think that if there are circumstances where people feel that they don't misunderstand you, I think that there's a good it's a good effort to have someone like me come in and just say, look, make mistakes. I make all the mistakes in the world. So I'm not going to be someone that's going to rigorously say you have to use these pronouns, you have to get it right every time. No one can be perfect, no one can do it all the time. Just try and be conscious about it and think about it when individuals do go through this experience, because there are more and more people being brave enough to come out as themselves. I think that we're seeing the climate change, and we've got to adapt.
Absolutely. And I think you said something to us recently, which really stuck with me is you have to get it wrong to get it right. And that's what you're saying, right? I think sometimes people, are worried about not knowing where to start. But I think the essentials are to have a safe space, a psychological safety for people. And policies do help with clarity, even if we do always say that it is on a case by case to help guide people through any of the processes that they might try to go through, or at least signpost. So I did want to ask you a little bit about, transition policies and what you think is important, whether it's, gender reassignment surgery or just the mental health impact. What do you think are some key things that should be included for people to feel that they have enough of an understanding?
I think one of the things that I always use my mum as a sort of like an example for because she's an accountant at a law firm. So very different environment to me. I work as a creative beast. But she runs a team of 21 people. So she's got lots of people that I can kind of like use as sort of like a survey. And I think that sometimes when the policies are enforced from a very sort of like senior position and they're not given a human face, they're not coming from a community driven thing, or they're not from a person that's come in that's gone through the experience of being trans, but it's just enforced without like a humanizing side of it. It can get people's backs up because people just go to work and no one's being paid to be lectured about pronouns like that. And it can affect people's ability to relate to you. So I think that sometimes having people that are just going to come in, that are just going to share what their experience is and not kind of preach or teach, but just say, this is what I've been through and it would have been helpful if I had this, is a brilliant way of doing it. And also, if there are different intersections, because being trans is one thing, but in the workplace, there are different intersections where you could face racism or discrimination against age or sexism, whatever it is. As long as it's community led and the people that want to be involved are leading it, I think that's the best way to start. Because again, you do see resistance when you're preaching at someone, you're telling someone what they have to do. So letting people have the space to make mistakes, knowing that everyone is going to make mistakes, and having someone like me to say, yeah, I make mistakes all the time. I mean, like I'm still getting used to days because I started my whole journey over 2 decades ago now. So the non-binary thing was never in my learning when I grew up, and adapting to my friends that now identify as they. I'm like, oh my God, it's like that's I still have to get my head around it. So there we go.
No, that's super helpful. I think, with specific to policies, for HR people who might be thinking, it's important to be clear about obviously time off, or, are they allowed to use sick leave if they're going through a transition? What will happen if they're in a big company or even a small company and they want to change their records, for example, or change their pronouns?
Mm,
So making sure you're working with the people team and the IT team. So that's done, in a confidential manner, any way to communicate the change, because people will want to communicate in a different way, as you were saying. Some people will want to be very open, and some people are still working through. So there's the best place to get that information is within your workforce, and to ask your workforce, whether through survey or employee groups, to get more information. Let's talk about the other side of that coin, though, in terms of, I guess, the danger of tokenizing certain people in an organization that maybe are still figuring things out and don't want to be burdened with being that one person who has to have all the answers. Have you had any experience with that, or what's your thoughts on that more generally?
yes, absolutely. Because you don't want to, like, again, people go to work because they need to go to work to pay their bills. They're not going to work to become a teacher in addition to what they're paid to do. And it's kind of unfair to ask someone to take up the mantle of doing that. I mean, that's why it's so important to bring people that have got experience talking about this into the placement, or to be able to do that and to have like groups where you can access support. There are loads of organizations specifically around the LGBT community and trans community that can offer insight. I mean, I'm a patron for Beyond Reflections, which is a really great one because they offer mental health support. And for people that are families of someone that's trans, they offer support in that way, which isn't something that's spoken about much. There's not that much for the group surrounding someone's experience of being trans who also could need support or help understanding, because it's a difficult thing to get your head around that someone's been born not feeling like they align with what their body looks like or feels. And to me, it's like just allowing basic examples, because this is the thing that I've always been frustrated about. Because when I started to get more of a public profile in this sort of niche that I do, I was asked consistently to go on Good Morning TV and say, argue against someone that was right wing. Like they never profiled my work, they never wanted to share all the different things I've done in my career, which has been amazing. They wanted me to speak while people are eating their cornflakes or rushing their kids to school about my side of the story versus someone else's side of the story. And it just made no sense to me. I just thought, who's got the time in that like that early in the morning to watch an argument on TV? That's not gonna humanize the experience of what I've gone through. And I think that's the thing. It's bringing the humanization back into things. We've got so much more things in common than our genders. Do you know what I mean? Like we've got all have sick relatives to look after when they're poorly. We've all got late trains at the moment when we're trying to rush to get to work. We've got phone bills to pay and everything's gone up in price. Like everything, we got way more in common, and it's just bringing that back to ground zero, really, the commonality of all of us.
Yes, so important. Thank you for sharing that. Um, and a term that has come up previously that we've heard, that I heard from you for the first time, was pride washing. Can you tell me a little bit what you mean by pride washing, for people?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think because I was one of the first people to work on social media campaigns and when they were really starting, so this is over nearly 15 years ago now, that's when digital influencers were being asked to be the face of different things for brands. And they would not work with any of the LGBT group from the UK, like the beauty industry were not employing. There was only three of us when it all began, and we weren't being asked to do any of the campaigns. And then when I kind of said, well, I'm really good at all these different things. Why don't you work with me too? They offered me so much less than they offered the people like Zoella, who was the gorgeous Glean superstar online. And I just didn't think it was right because it was like, do you want me to tick a box or do you want me to do the same job? Because if we're selling mascara, I think I've got the biggest eyelashes, so I should be paid the same. If not, do you know what I mean? Like it just made no sense. And I think that so many pride events are looking for corporate donations because that's what they are. They're looking to raise money for all different things they're doing. But a lot of companies got to think about this throughout the year. It's not just on the LGBT History Month or over Pride season. It's got to be consistently. And when there's someone that's qualified and built momentum within their career and has earned their place as a leader, they should be paid the same as another leader and it should just be equal across the board. It's not specific to someone that's trying, they should be paid more or they should be given a tokenized slot. They should be just earning the same space and giving someone the room to earn that role is, and that's often not even looked at. I mean, the amount of gigs you will get offered over Pride season and there's like a dry spell. And it's like that's silly. You should be consistently thinking about who's qualified to do the job, regardless of what they are. And I think a lot of companies fall into the trap of saying, "Oh, we're doing the right things. We've got rainbows everywhere, or we've got the trans flag everywhere." But actually, are there any trans people in employment? Are there any trans people behind the scenes offering consistent guidance, or just in their position saying, "Well, maybe you could be inclusive like this." Like even if there's someone just in a regular role that can add their two p in like that, that would be helpful. So I think that's more that I was kind of trying to get
Yeah,
at.
no, absolutely. It's so important. And it really speaks to also, how to promote these policies within the workplace, right? It's exactly as you say, not to just think, oh, it's coming up to June Pride Month or, February LGBTQ History Month, and really embed these policies in the workplace. So in your mind, one of the ways that we can do that, we already discussed, is asking employees, what works for them, and what's important. And the second is really around education, right? So starting very basic in terms of maybe explaining terms. I think sometimes it's not very obvious to people, what these terms might mean, how to go around, pronouns, what's the best way of talking about gender reassignment. So do you have any view, having gone through this yourself? I know you've worked mostly independently, but I know you also worked within other bigger corporates. So, what has your experience been like in terms of seeing other people trying to get educated on the topic?
Sure. Well, one good example I can give, which ended up with one of my favorite things I've done in my job, is Estee Lauder asked me to speak in the lockdown to their LGBTQ ERG. So I thought, like in my little naivety, that I was going to be talking to people that wanted to come to an LGBT talk. And ironically, it was all the BPs of all the brands under Estee Lauder from all of the ones you can imagine. And it was me talking about my experience when I was booked, well, very, very young in my career. I wanted to get a job in retail because I was at college, didn't have any money. And they said to me, because I was so feminine looking naturally and I was very ambiguous, that my image did not fit the department store's look. So I was told this, and they did not have any guidance in place. They didn't have any anti-discrimination policies in place. There was nothing. I was just told that because the way I naturally looked, I wasn't fit to work on a makeup counter. Now, I was working doing celebrity makeup at this time, and it was a very strange reality to be told that and to be disapproved by a store, but also at the same time be praised for that same skill. So I was talking about this to the VPs, and I said we need to ensure that people are not saying this, that there is a policy in place that actually supports people who are coming from all walks of life, because you don't know what anyone's experience is. You shouldn't care. It should be merit based and what you can bring to the table in that job. And because I said that, and I think I was so brave to speak about it to the president of Estée Lauder UK and all the VPs of brands, they said to me, "Well, Jojo, we take what you're saying on board, and we think you should come on board and tell your story through a MAC collection." So I launched my first MAC collection with a huge donation from their Viva Glam Foundation, which is an HIV foundation, to mermaids. So they donated £50,000 in my honour to mermaids, and they changed it. So now that LGBT people are now supported, there aren't going to be discrimination. We can see lots of LGBT people being booked at the same time throughout the year. And I think for me, that was a huge achievement because it made me feel like it's not going to happen to someone else because I just didn't. It was so shocking. And again, we go back to the economical thing. If you don't have any money and you're stuck in this sort of like experience that you're not happy with within your body and you can't pay for any changes, it's like all the mental health stuff that ties into that. And it's the limitation to access that I think that brings. So that was one of my experiences that I can talk about that happened, which I was very proud of because it's
Yeah,
made
no, thank you.
significant change.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing. That's absolutely wonderful and impactful. Actually, we just got a question in the chat, which is quite similar. What's the most effective way to educate people about gender identity challenges and to normalize these topics? So I think, we've given an example, and I think you mentioned the VPs being there. So having senior buy-in is important, right? I think it's quite difficult to implement change if you don't have that, as well as the information from employees. Is there anything else that you would add to this?
Booking me to speak to your company.
Of course. Also, you can work with Fertifa. We work with companies
Yes,
like so. Apart from us, who people have to
yes.
have as a must-have. You spoke
Oh,
about community. Yes,
there's
go
one
for it.
thing as well I would add because when we looked at the amazing response to our last chat a couple of weeks ago, and you uploaded the chat to your social media, you built a sort of internal resource of the chat that we're having now. So bringing in people that can speak on this, that you're recording, uploading it to your social media, and then directing people that have these questions to chats like this could be a very useful tool because you're not actually sort of putting loads and loads of effort into building a new platform. You're just using things that are naturally happening as sort of points that you can point people to. So yeah, that was something.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think something that you mentioned, which I find fascinating, is really around the concept of creating communities. So community-driven spaces that, are organic and really wanted rather than pushed by, an HR team and really are coming from within. Do you have any thoughts on maybe communities that you've seen that are particularly successful, or any advice for people who want to use that approach to, help employees through these challenges?
Sure. Like I think so many times when I've worked with different brands, I've been surprised by how it's been led because again, I think that sometimes if you bring in a sort of like an enforced thing, it doesn't really give people the space to just say, "Oh, I'm interested in that." It feels like an obligation or something that's a work thing instead of something that could be there as a support to the work. And when I was working with Dell, and Dell has been an amazing partner last year, I did a London Fashion Week event with them and designed some digital makeup, which was cool because it took me out of what people assume I do, which is just makeup all day and do tech, which is something I'm kind of interested in. But they had an LGBT gamers thing because obviously all the people that work at Dell know a little bit about video games because they do gaming computers. And that LGBT gaming thing offered both the LGBT support, but also was an interest that wasn't specifically just about we are on a protest. It was like really cool, and I thought that's such a cool example. Like it's not just like the thing that's intersectionalized; it's also the interest that you share. So it's almost like a safer sort of experience. You don't go there with the intention of saying like we're going to build groundbreaking policies and campaigns, but you're doing something that's also fun. I think combining something casual with something serious is always the best way.
Wonderful. No, I really like that. And I can see how the engagement might be quite high for that. I think, we've been talking a little bit about how we educate other people, but I think what's important to also speak about is how to support employees who are actually going through, a transition, whether it's social or medical, who are still figuring things out. And, data shows us that more and more employees are turning to their employers rather than their healthcare providers for support and for information. What do you think about that, and what you think are the non-negotiables for workplace to have to make sure that their employees are supported during that process.
Well, I think the reason why people are going to their employers about it is because of the financial side of things. I think people can't afford to pay privately. I mean, even if you go to an LGBT supported charity that offers mental health support like counselling or talking therapy, there is almost a 4 to I hear 16-week waiting list. Unless you pay privately, which is what 70 to however much a session. So there is very limited support in place, and I think that that's why people go to their employees. I think the non-negotiables would be just to not have understanding. I mean, we spoke about this a couple of weeks ago, but I'm not going to predict what individual companies' revenue is, what they can afford. As long as you're offering the same across the board to anyone that needs that support, and you're just including the experience of being trans into that. I mean, if someone's lost their parent, they need mental health support. If someone's struggling with fertility, they might need that support. If there's all different things that require mental health support, and just to include the trans experience in that is important. If you can individually help someone that's trans with I don't know if a company has a policy with Bupa or they have, I don't know what each company has, but there are different things you can offer. But as long as it's equal across the board and you're experiencing understanding, I think that's the best way. And you've got somewhere where you can talk about things safely.
No, so true. I think mental health support is crucial. And I think what we find with all these policies is that in a way they end up being linked, right? So what we're saying here is have an inclusive policy, but make sure you also have an anti-discrimination policy. In your policy, make sure you're signposting as well to mental health because people may need access. If you don't have any budget for mental health, there's loads of access to, mental health spaces that people can sign up on the NHS or other places. So there's always a way to help people through that journey. But first and foremost, creating that psychological safety in the workplace.
Yes.
Super. So, final point really more around language, inclusive language. I mean, we always say at Fertifa how important it is for any policy, even when we're referring to, parental policy, still people refer sometimes as maternity policy, making sure that you are including every eventuality so people can find themselves and guide themselves in there. What sort of how important is that really in your mind? Let's say you're working somewhere, you're looking for information, to have that inclusive language and to feel like you're understood.
I think it's very important for people that are going through a transition where they've been denied their identity, and to affirm their identity, language is very important. So if someone's struggled with their gender identity for 40 years, but then they transition and they finally reach for who they want to be, it's really affirming to that person to use the language that they prefer. And it's got to be individual led, because I always think there's as many genders as there are people. Like, everyone's got a completely unique perspective of who they are. And it's just a bit about being polite. I mean, my dad calls his car a she, and I find that bizarre, but it's like we struggle with pronouns when it comes to trans people. But there's so much that we can do. But I would just let the person individually lead the way with what their preferences are. When it comes to family forming, I just think family forming leave or whatever that is, where it's not specific to, because I don't know if there's a gay couple that has limited options versus a cisgender couple. I don't know what the policies are individually for companies, but as long as it's equal across the board, and whether you're trans or you're gay or whatever, as long as it matches, then I think that's the best way to go. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think going back to what we said already, and I know we're repeating ourselves, but it is so important. Sometimes people don't put a policy in place, one, because they're worried to get it wrong. So what we're saying is, you need to get it wrong a few times, get feedback, iterate. It will grow with you and grow with your workforce as it's growing and as you're getting new people. And then the second thing we always get is, for example, you mentioned the gamification. We don't have a budget. How can we put a policy in place? And really what we're saying,
Mm.
that's not the point. The point is just to have an authentic policy and a safe space for people to recognize themselves and ask questions and signpost them in the right areas. So just to add to that, we have a few questions that are coming and I see them popping through. So I'll move to the Q&A for now. First question is, what's the best way to get senior leadership buy-in and support for inclusive policies? Would you like me to take that one first?
You take that one.
Okay. Okay, so I mean, I think we touched upon it in different ways already. So the first thing is making sure that you understand your workforce, that you're polling your workforce, you're surveying your workforce, you understand what people are looking for, and you understand what your workforce is made of. The reason that we say this is because with that information, with that data, with that feedback, you can then go to the senior leadership and show that there is a need and that there is a must actually to create policies that are inclusive of everyone. And I think in my experience and from what I hear from other companies, that is always the most effective way, is to get some employee groups, to get data to show that this is important and to show how this is going to be implemented within the company. What do you think about that?
I think that's absolutely right. To let the people that work there lead the way. Um, it's sometimes I think people need to see examples of it to be like, okay, I understand now what the need is. And sometimes, again, building resources where you do bring people in that share their experiences and building a sort of archive of just different walks of life can sometimes be evidence in itself.
Absolutely. Sorry, I've been muting myself to give you the full the full space to chat. I completely agree. And what I would add just to close that question is, of course, as an HR person, you're lobbying or trying to get different things implemented at different times. And so, to keep trying. I think, sometimes it might not be the right time, but to keep bringing it to the importance and to the top of the table so that things are being spoken about, with to show that its importance, and with the knowledge that the more allies you have, the more you bring it up, the more likely it is to get implemented. The second question: we work in a very male-dominated environment. How do we set up an ERG for gender identity challenges in a way that's authentic and not forced?
You have to let the people that are going through the gender non-conformity or their trans experience lead the way with that and share what their experiences are. I think that it's very difficult to guesstimate what that would be like because I think that sometimes from my experience, the men that I work with are normally queer. They're all the makeup people. Well, not all the makeup. I shouldn't generalize, but a lot of the people in beauty swing to the rainbow side of the table, shall we say? So I think they're more open to it. I think it's difficult for people that this is the kind of the person that I was describing at early on, which is a lot of people just they have a very routine life. They go to work to pay the bills. They come home and they're not going to work to be educated. They don't actually want to or have the capacity to listen to it. And I totally respect that. People are getting paid there to do their job, not to go through all of the additional education you can about gender policies. But to give an example of someone and to show like, look, this person went through this experience and it just in case that happens here, let's just be precautious. And also scaring them with lawsuits. No, I'm joking. I'm joking. No, just humanizing the experience and bringing in examples of people that are actually going through it or have gone through it. I think that's the best way. And if they're not buying it, I guess again, try again. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. Try and try again. So we have get it wrong until you get it right, try and try again. We have lots of sound bites from today. But yes, I completely agree. I think, it has to be authentic. Ideally, you do have someone who is speaking from their own experience so that people, even if that's not something that they're personally going through, that they can relate. And as you say, can humanize. You can bring in speakers like yourself. You can work with companies like Fertifa and other providers that help around that topic. And, you don't always have to spend money to be able to do these things. I think, start small, just get the voice built up around that topic, and then go from there. I think it will guide you, as you say. So another question, and just to remind people, if you do want to pop a question in, put it in the Q&A chat and just tick the anonymous box. This is more from a clinical side. So let's see if you or I can answer, but I'm sure we'll figure it out. From the clinical side, what other support can we give our employees aside from mental health support, which we've discussed, and access to counseling?
So obviously, when you are going through a hormonal experience, whatever it is, whether you're going through, even when you're going through IVF and you've got to go through all the process of egg harvesting and the hormonal changes that can happen, or someone's going through menopause and there's hormonal changes that can happen, someone that's going through andropause, which isn't as commonly discussed, but is also the male driven sort of similar thing, and someone that's going through transition. There are different experiences that people go through that everyone can find common ground with. There is something that like your mood, your physical, but like, oh my God, like I used to faint. I used to get really, really, really hot and faint. And it was like, this is really common, I think, with hormonal. When you don't have enough of the right hormones, it can knock you out. It's similar to hot flashes in menopause. And that was like, no one would speak to me about it. No, the doctors didn't know anything about it. It was hard to, or I'd have like blackout memory loss kind of things, which was really annoying. That's what my experience was. Now I'm older and everything's a bit more settled, and I'm finding comfort in a sort of grey area in my life where I'm not presenting every day as femme, not presenting every day as masculine, just trying to find my way as day goes on. But I think that when you bring examples of that into the conversation and you can actually speak openly about it, you can deal with whatever problems arise. I mean, to me, the mental health support is the biggest thing. You don't want to be too in people's business when it comes to their physical health. I mean, it's individual what they want to bring up or talk about. But for me, I think like the mental health is the big one. Is that fair? Is that
I think it's fair, and I think mental health is super important, obviously, and that's why we recommend counseling, isn't it? And then I guess education, right? So access to
yeah.
information, just from a clinical perspective, so that people try to anticipate what might happen to them in terms of the hormones changing or in terms of what's happening physically. And again, coming back to the policy, since it's what we're talking about, the recovery times may differ from person to person, and so it's very different, and very important to have a policy that allows for that and that allows for people to say what they need when they need it. That's what I was going to add. Okay, wonderful. Before we go, I did want to give you the opportunity to share one story with us that kind of really resonated. I don't know if it's around you growing up, or if you could speak to younger Joe, and what you would say to them now, having gone through everything that you've gone through. I think it's such a kaleidoscopic life and experience. I do want people to
Oh,
have the benefit of that.
wow. I think like when I was younger, I really did not see examples of how I could do what I wanted to do because I wanted to do so many different things. And I thought I kind of was living in rose tinted glasses until I think I got to about 2014 because that's when I won the competition I won. And I did not understand why I wasn't allowed to do the same things as everyone else, like all my peers. And it wasn't until later that I realized that there is a way to do everything I wanted to do, and it's not relying on other people. Like I self create my own opportunities and I start building ideas and then I form them into something physical. And I didn't have the confidence to do it. And I had to make so many mistakes on the way and do so many jobs that I didn't really want to do to have the financial support to do things I did want to do. And I think I wish I would have told myself then, just do it, try something new. But that's the only thing I can think of because I think I didn't have the confidence because I didn't see enough people like me. I didn't see anyone like me that had a Mac collection out. I didn't see anyone that me who'd won a competition like I've won. I never saw any examples of it. And I thought, I think like I had to almost be a little bit sort of, oh, there's no one like me to then go, well, I will do it. And I don't know how I did it, but I'm glad I did. But I wish I told myself sooner, you can do it. Just go and do it because that's, you can. Oh, I think you're on mute.
I am on mute. Thank you so much. I was saying you're such a force of nature. Thank you so
Oh,
much for being with us. And I was going to bring it back to the policies for all my sins to say, just go and do it. Just start it. Just start somewhere. You'll get the support you need. Make sure it has inclusive language. Make sure you're thinking of the employees that you're including, and it will be amazing for everyone involved. So thank you everyone for coming. Joseph, thank you so much for joining us. It was fascinating to speak to about you. I feel like we could speak for hours and hours. And I did pop in the chat. If you're looking for any help around these topics, do feel free to contact Fertifa. We will send a recording of this webinar as well. And I continue to follow you on social media. So whether it's, generally or for my makeup tips, so amazing to have met you virtually. Thank you, everyone.
Oh,
And thank you so
thank you.
much again.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. Wonderful pleasure. Bye.